The Normans were the people who, in the 10th and 11th centuries, gave the name to Normandy, a region in France. They were descended from Norse raiders and pirates from Denmark, Iceland and Norway who, under the leader Rollo, agreed to swear fealty to King Charles III of West Francia. Through generations of assimilation and mixing with the native Frankish and Roman-Gaulish populations, the descendants would gradually adopt the Carolingian-based cultures of West Francia, ultimately resulting in their own assimilation into the Romance society. The distinct cultural and ethnic identity of the Normans emerged initially in the first half of the 10th century, and it continued to evolve over the succeeding centuries. The Norman dynasty had a major political, cultural and military impact on medieval Europe and even the Near East. The Normans were famed for the martial spirit and eventually for the Christian piety, becoming exponents of the Catholic orthodoxy into which they assimilated. They adopted the Gallo-Romance language of the Frankish land they settled, the dialect becoming known as Norman, Norma and Norman French, an important literary language. The Duchy of Normandy, which they formed by treaty with the French crown, was a great fief of medieval France, and under Richard I of Normandy was forged into a cohesive and formidable principality in feudal tenure. The Normans are noted both for the culture, such as the unique Romanesque architecture and musical traditions, and for the significant in military accomplishments and innovations. Norman adventurers founded the Kingdom of Sicily under Roger II after conquering southern Italy from the Saracens and Byzantines. An expedition on behalf of the Duke William the Conqueror led to the Norman conquest of England at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Norman cultural and military influence spread from these new European centers to the Crusader states of the Near East, where the Prince Bohemond I founded the Principality of Antioch in the Levant, to Scotland and Wales in Great Britain, to Ireland, and to the coasts of North Africa and the Canary Islands. The legacy of the Normans persists today through the regional languages and dialects of France, England, and Sicily, as well as the various cultural, judicial and political arrangements they introduced in their conquered territories. Etymology. The English name Normans comes from the French words Normans, Normans plural of Normand, modern French Normand, which is itself borrowed from Old Low Franconian Nortman, Northman, or directly from Old Norse Northmath, Latinized variously as Nordmanus, Normanus, or Nordmanus to mean Norseman, Viking. Characteristics and traits. The 11th century Benedictine monk and historian Goffredo Malaterra characterized the Normans thus: specially marked by cunning, despising their own inheritance in the hope of winning a greater, eager after both gain and dominion, given to imitation of all kinds, holding a certain mean between lavishness and greediness, that is, perhaps uniting, as they certainly did, these two seemingly opposite qualities. The chief men were specially lavish through the desire of good report. They were, moreover, a race skillful in flattery, given to the study of eloquence, so that the very boys were orators. A race altogether unbridled unless held firmly down by the yoke of justice. They were enduring of toil, hunger, and cold whenever fortune laid it on them, given to hunting and hawking, delighting in the pleasure of horses, and of all the weapons and garb of war. Settling of Normandy. In the course of the 10th century, the initially destructive incursions of Norse war bands into the rivers of France evolved into more permanent encampments that included local women and personal property. The Duchy of Normandy, which began in 911 as a fiefdom, was established by the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte between King Charles III of West Francia and the famed Viking ruler Rollo, and was situated in the former Frankish kingdom of Neustria. The treaty offered Rollo and his men the French lands between the River Epte and the Atlantic coast in exchange for the protection against further Viking incursions. The area corresponded to the northern part of present-day Upper Normandy down to the River Seine, but the duchy would eventually extend west beyond the Seine. The territory was roughly equivalent to the old province of Rouen, and reproduced the Roman administrative structure of Gallia Lugdunensis II. Before Rollo's arrival, its populations did not differ from Picardy or the Isle de France, which were considered Frankish. Earlier Viking settlers had begun arriving in the 880s, but were divided between colonies in the east around the low Seine Valley and in the west in the Cotentin Peninsula, and were separated by traditional pagi, where the population remained about the same with almost no foreign settlers. Rollo's contingents who raided and ultimately settled Normandy and parts of the Atlantic coast included Danes, Norwegians, Norse Gaels, Orkney Vikings, possibly Swedes, and Anglo-Danes from the English Danelaw under Norse control. The descendants of Rollo's Vikings and the Frankish wives would replace the Norse religion and Old Norse language with Catholicism and the Gallo-Romance language of the local people, blending the maternal Frankish heritage with Old Norse traditions and customs to synthesize a unique Norman culture in the north of France. The Norman language was forged by the adoption of the indigenous Langue d'Oil branch of Romance by a Norse-speaking ruling class, and it developed into the regional language that survives today. The Normans thereafter adopted the growing feudal doctrines of the rest of France, and worked them into a functional hierarchical system in both Normandy and in England. The new Norman rulers were culturally and ethnically distinct from the old French aristocracy, most of whom traced the lineage to Franks of the Carolingian dynasty. Most Norman knights remained poor and land-hungry, and by 1066 Normandy had been exporting fighting horsemen for more than a generation. Many Normans of Italy, France and England eventually served as avid crusaders under the Italo-Norman Prince Bohemond I and the Anglo-Norman King Richard the Lionheart.